This is the last of our 5-part series making up the mini course Basic Introductory Nutrition. In the first lecture, I discussed the question of why we should care and what are the basic elements of nutrition, what are we eating, when are we eating it, and water. Second, third, and fourth lectures were protein, carbohydrate, dietary fats. Now I want to circle back to that initial basic concept of what are we eating, when are we eating it, and water. So what are we eating should focus on the macro and micronutrients in a form that is as close as possible to what the earth naturally provides us, because nutrient density is the highest when foods are not processed. Foods that have vitamins, minerals, and other types of nutrients added to them are more oxidized, so the nutrients are not as vital or beneficial to us, and they do not have the spectrum of complexity that foods naturally provide us, and therefore what we see in the scientific literature is that the benefits are lacking, like in antioxidant supplements compared to eating foods that are high in antioxidants. The difference in the health effect is profound, in one case not being statistically significant, and in the other case being not only statistically significant but clinically significant. So thinking about what you're eating amounts to considering what is your protein, carbohydrate, and dietary fat sources in your day. Thinking about when you're eating amounts to pacing your nutrients through the day. This goes for macronutrients, having protein in all of your meals, at least some, having an energy resource, so a carbohydrate, in each of your meals. Dietary fats take several hours through the lymph system to then eventually get to the bloodstream in your cells, so the timing of dietary fats is the least important. You could bunch them all into one meal, or not to have them in any meals and just put them in snacks, like if you're snacking on nuts and things. So the timing of dietary fats is the least important, and we store dietary fats very effectively in the body. But protein is stored as muscle tissue, which is not really storage in active tissue. When you're losing muscle because you didn't eat protein, you're losing mobility and metabolic rate. So shouldn't really think of that as a storage form of protein, although that is how the body uses it when you're not eating protein. And we don't store much carbohydrate, so we go into a light ketosis using protein as a fuel source when we don't eat carbohydrate, which is evidence that the body doesn't produce enough carbohydrate to keep up with its needs when we don't eat any at all. The liver will produce carbohydrate to keep the brain going. The brain is the main consumer of carbohydrate. The Institute of Medicine estimates in its dietary reference intakes that we need 400 to 500, so over 100 grams of carbohydrate a day just for the brain. The rest of your organs, like heart, lungs, kidneys, etc., they burn fats very effectively, but the brain mainly wants to burn sugars because its metabolic rate is 10 times higher than the other cells in your body. Your brain is only a few percent of your mass and in your body and your volume in your body, but it's 25-30% of your metabolic rate, depending on how much lean tissue and how active you are. So for 3% of your body to have as much as 30% of your metabolic rate means that the neurons in your brain are burning calories 10 times faster than all the other cells in your body. It's an order of magnitude higher metabolic rate per neuron. And only sugar can keep up with that, and ketones as a backup. So the brain doesn't burn much fats, and that's why the brain will drop your blood sugar while you're sleeping, and then of course when you're moving around, your muscles will drop your blood sugar. And since your brain doesn't like to burn fats very much, it can't keep up with the high metabolic rate of the brain will stimulate cortisol release to break down your muscle as a backup fuel source when your blood sugar is low. So this is a reason the brain is the reason for needing and including carbohydrates in your diet. Of course, carbohydrates that digest very quickly, like processed carbohydrates, breads, even whole grain breads, they're ground into a fine flour before they make the bread, so by the time it gets to the stomach and it becomes mushy flour like it was before it was baked, the digestion rate is extremely high. It's within 10 percentage points of white bread, and so you end up with carbohydrates being converted into fats, which totally misses the point. You want the carbohydrates to go into your brain, into your muscle tissue, into your active tissues, not to go to your fat tissues where they're converted into fats. So you include carbohydrates, but you want them to digest slow enough so that they actually get to the target tissues where you're wanting them to go to increase your vitality, your physical energy and your mental energy, focus, intuition, creativity, inspiration levels, reduce depression, reduce schizophrenia, reduce dementia. All of these things are improved with healthier fats to the brain, hydration for the brain, and for a stable blood sugar for your brain. So include carbohydrates, but not the ones that are most readily available in society today. We have this toxic nutrition environment that's established by this opioid response in our that we have to sugars. And so there's sugars added to bread, which is already sugar, so sugar added to sugar, and pizzas and tortillas and rice and burritos. So regardless of what culinary style or ethnic style of food, or where you go to get your, if you go to French Laundry and pay $500 for a meal, it's white carbs and animal fats, just like if you go to McDonald's or Jack in the Box or Kentucky Fried Chicken. It's the fast digesting carbohydrates and the high animal fat content in meals, even with 2 orders of magnitude difference in price in different locations, is going to be just as high one place as another. So if you're just eating whatever comes to you from your toxic nutrition environment, you're going to end up after a few years wondering how to escape that and needing to eat healthy. And eating healthy means you don't eat out with your friends and you don't eat with your family because your kids and spouse want to eat the way they've been eating. So it leads to a form of isolation that isn't any fun. So adding vegetables to fast digesting carbohydrates slows down their digestion significantly. I'll talk about this in future courses, the weight loss course and the as well as the sports nutrition and the healthy eating for health courses, because slowing down the digestion rate of carbohydrates to match the absorption rate of your lean tissues, which is higher in people with a higher metabolic rate and lower with people with a lower metabolic rate, will increase your mental and physical energy in response to the carbohydrates that you're eating. So spacing your carbohydrates out is important, but in addition to that, you have to think about the digestion rate, because even if you're under eating, let's say you eat a 200-calorie candy bar as a substitute for a 600-calorie meal, where you're eating fewer calories, but the digestion rate is higher than the 600-calorie meal, so you end up with more body fat from the candy bar than 3 times the number of calories in a meal. So it's not just spacing out junk food that I'm talking about, it's having carbohydrates that digest slower, like oatmeal for breakfast. On a salad, you could include the croutons, because the coarseness of the vegetables will slow down the digestion rate of the croutons, so the croutons will enter the bloodstream much slower with the salad than if you had eaten the croutons by themselves, which is kind of like eating crackers or bread by itself. So when you have vegetables combined with faster digesting carbohydrates, then you end up with a slower digestion and the carbohydrates entering the bloodstream slower. So you can eat the hamburger and the pizza and the burritos as long as you have maybe at least 2, 3, maybe even 4 times the volume of vegetables with it to slow it down. And if you don't, then it's better to back off on the total carbohydrate load so that you don't end up in a situation where you feel like you have to eliminate carbohydrates, which then leaves you with a low blood sugar and the brain eating your muscle tissue, which then drops your metabolic rate. And before long, your health is declining because of your effort to try to increase your health by avoiding carbohydrates. So it's a mistake to avoid the carbohydrates. Instead, what you want to do is replace the faster carbohydrates with slower ones, and when you're eating faster carbohydrates, then you have a vegetable before or with that carbohydrate to slow it down. So carbohydrates are the trickiest to space out through your day, whereas protein digests pretty slow on its own without any vegetable intervention. Doesn't need anything to help it digest fairly slow, so just including it at least every 12 hours, breakfast and dinner. Discussed that in the protein lecture, if not also in lunch in between. And if you're training really hard and worry about depleting protein in between meals, then you could include a little bit of protein in snacks. A protein snack might be something like yogurt or cottage cheese, along with the granola or the fruit that you would sprinkle on top. And spacing of dietary fats is the least critical because it takes several hours to even get to your cells, and your body stores plenty of it. So if you went a day without eating any fats, then they would come from your body fat, even if it's essential fats like omega-3 and 6 fats. But if you have hunger issues, then including fats in your meals is a good idea, because the hormonal response to fats will help you reduce your hunger. So if you have hunger issues, then that is a motivation to include fats in all of your meals. But your physiological needs do not demand that fats are evenly spaced throughout your day. But your physiological needs do demand that you have some spacing of protein, and in particular, where you have to have the tightest control is with the carbohydrate piece, so that not only is it spaced out, but so that its digestion rate matches the absorption rate of your lean tissue, so you don't have a spillover into body fat, even when you're under eating, so regardless of how many calories that you're eating. Water should also be evenly spaced out. And so the last piece of this what, when, water base of how to eat is the hydration. And I discussed that in the first lecture. If you want to go back and review that, let me just summarize that if you're high in salt consumption, you lose a lot of fluids, go to the bathroom a lot, and if you're very low in salt intake when you're perspiring a lot because you're fairly athletic, then you don't have enough salts to hold on to your fluids, then you'll also be going to the bathroom a lot. And then digestion gets worse and sleep quality gets worse. So you might start thinking that you're allergic to a whole, a long list of foods, and you might only have 1 or 2 food allergies, but you think you have a dozen. It's because you're not hydrated enough, even when you're drinking tons and tons of water, because you can't hold on to your fluids, and it's hard to fall asleep after your first REM cycle, and so you get about 4 hours of sleep every night, and then you just lay there awake. Or even if you sleep 8 hours straight through, it's not as deep a sleep, and so you're always unrested when you wake up. So think about a salt mismatch and how much of the weak diuretic tea, herbal teas are not diuretics, but regular teas and coffee, both of them, also discussed this in the first lecture, are weak diuretics. So if you go past several doses of them in the day, then you might just be opening the spigot to water loss to your kidneys and urinating out the fluids. It doesn't matter whether you drink 1 cup of water or 10 gallons of water, it just pours out because the spigot is open. That's how diuretics work. So if you're way off in your salt intake, high or low, or are drinking weak diuretics to the point where they are significant diuretics, then it doesn't make any difference how much water you drink. You're going to be dehydrated. And so assuming that your salts and your weak diuretics are moderate in intake and matching your perspiration losses in terms of the salts, then you'll be able to retain the fluids and be hydrated from drinking the proper amount of fluid, and that is 1 liter for every 1,000 calories that you eat, spaced through the day. So our summary of nutrition is that you want to think about what you're eating, macro and micronutrients as dense as possible, as unprocessed as possible, which inherently will digest slower, when you're eating. So you want to pace your nutrients through the day. You want to have breakfast, some healthy snacks. Avoid going late on lunch and dinner. That will lead to higher cravings that have you eating beyond satiety. I mean, you won't even be hungry anymore, but the cravings will keep you eating. So try to avoid late lunches and dinners. And then with water, think about your retention. And as a good rule of thumb, have at least an equal amount of volume to anything else that you would drink afterwards. So if you're going to have a soda, drink an equal volume of water first. If you're going to have a coffee, drink an equal amount of water first. If you're going to have a glass of wine, have an equal amount of water first. So in summary, use your nutrition common sense. You don't even need to listen to these lectures or read anything or take a class anywhere. Just thinking about what are you eating, when are you eating, and water will motivate your common sense to surface and apply itself in your life. And we all have this natural nutrition common sense when we ask ourselves the question, what, when, and water, where we'll improve what we're doing by more than half and achieve significant physiological targets and improvements in health without any form of learning or reading or anything else, just using what you already know: what, when, and water.